My friends and I decided to hit up a new club that had just opened on the outskirts of town. The area wasn't great, one of those neighborhoods where you keep your wits about you, especially at night. It wasn't the worst part of the city, but it definitely wasn't the safest either. The club was across the street from a sports field and a big game had just ended, so the streets were packed with cars and people. We had to park a decent distance away since the club's lot was full. By the time we left, the game was over and the once crowded street was eerily deserted. Our car, a small two-door, was the only one left on the entire block. It was just the three of us. Emma, the responsible one who'd volunteered to be our designated driver, Lily, who was already tipsy and stumbling, and me, who was probably even drunker than Lily. We were laughing and joking as we walked back to the car, the night air cool against our flushed cheeks. As we approached the car, Emma noticed something that sent a chill down my spine. A large white van was slowly rolling down the street behind us, its headlights dim, almost like it was trying not to be noticed. "Look at that cliché," Emma said with a nervous laugh, pointing at the van. "It's like something out of a horror movie." Lily and I giggled, not taking it seriously. "Maybe they're just lost," I said, waving it off. We were nearly at the car, and I was already fumbling with the keys, trying to get the door open. Emma's car was old, and the key had to be jiggled just right to unlock it. But then the van did something strange. It veered off the road and began driving through the parallel parking spots, straight toward us. It wasn't in the lane anymore. It was heading directly for us. "Get in the car now!" Emma shouted, all humor gone from her voice. I yanked open the passenger door and shoved the seat forward so Lily could scramble into the back. My heart was racing, the alcohol in my system doing nothing to dull the sudden, sharp fear that gripped me. Emma was already behind the wheel, her fingers shaking as she turned the key in the ignition. The van was close, too close. It wasn't slowing down. "Emma, go!" I screamed as I threw myself into the front seat and slammed the door shut. Emma floored the gas pedal, and the car lurched forward just as the van screeched to a stop where we had been standing seconds before. We sped down the street, the tires squealing as Emma took a corner too fast. I glanced back and saw the van still sitting there, its engine idling, its headlights cutting through the darkness like a predator watching its prey. What the hell was that? Lily slurred from the back seat, her voice thick with fear and alcohol. "I don't know, but we're not sticking around to find out," Emma said, her voice tight with tension. She kept glancing in the rearview mirror, as if expecting the van to suddenly reappear. The drive back to Emma's apartment was tense. We didn't speak much, each of us lost in our own thoughts, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The streets were mostly empty now, the city's nightlife starting to wind down. But the fear from earlier still clung to me, an icy knot in my stomach. As we turned onto the road leading to Emma's building, the fear twisted into something darker. Parked along the curb just a few blocks from her apartment was the same white van. "Oh my God," Emma whispered, her voice barely audible. "How did it get here so fast?" "It must have taken a different route," Lily said, panic rising in her voice. "But why? What do they want?" Emma drove past the van slowly, trying to act casual, but I could see the fear in her eyes. As we passed, the van's engine roared to life and it pulled out behind us, its headlights glaring in the rearview mirror. "Emma, drive faster!" I urged, the words tumbling out in a panic. She didn't need to be told twice. She floored the gas, the car speeding down the road as the van followed closely behind. It was like a nightmare come to life, the city's darkened streets twisting into a labyrinth as we tried to outrun our pursuer. "Call the police!" Emma yelled, her voice cracking under the strain. My hands were shaking so badly it took me 2 tries to dial 911. The phone rang, but just as I was about to speak, the van suddenly sped up, pulling alongside us. I could see it clearly now, a hulking, ominous presence in the periphery, its tinted windows revealing nothing. But instead of ramming into us, the van swerved sharply, cutting in front of us and screeching to a halt. Emma had no choice but to slam on the brakes, the car skidding to a stop just inches from the van's bumper. "What the—" I started, but my words died in my throat as the van's side door slid open. 2 figures dressed in black jumped out, their faces hidden by ski masks. One of them held something large and metallic, glinting ominously under the streetlights. "Get out of the car!" one of them shouted, their voice muffled but menacing. Panic surged through me, and I could see the same terror mirrored in Emma's and Lily's eyes. We were trapped, and there was no way out. But then, out of nowhere, the sound of sirens filled the air. Police sirens, getting closer by the second. The masked figures hesitated, exchanging glances before one of them barked, "Let's go!" They jumped back into the van, slamming the door shut just as the first police car came into view, its lights flashing. The van sped off, disappearing down the street with the police car in pursuit. For a moment we just sat there, stunned and shaking, the silence in the car deafening after the chaos of the last few minutes. Another police car pulled up beside us, and an officer stepped out, his expression serious but calm. "Are you girls okay?" he asked, peering into the car. We're fine," Emma stammered, though her voice betrayed how far from fine we really were. The officer nodded. "We've had reports of suspicious activity in this area tonight. You're lucky we were nearby. Do you have any idea why they were after you?" We exchanged glances, each of us shaking our heads. "No," I said, my voice barely more than a whisper. "We don't know." The officer's radio crackled to life, and he turned away to respond, leaving us to our thoughts. But even as he spoke into the radio, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over, that we hadn't seen the last of the white van. The days that followed were a blur of unease and paranoia. We tried to go back to our normal lives, but the fear lingered, gnawing at us like a persistent itch. Emma insisted on driving us everywhere, never letting us walk alone, and we all found ourselves constantly looking over our shoulders. But just as we started to think that maybe, just maybe, it was over, something even more terrifying happened. It was a Wednesday afternoon when Lily didn't show up to work. She hadn't mentioned being sick or taking the day off, so it immediately felt off. Emma and I tried calling her, but there was no answer. After hours of worry, we decided to drive to her apartment. When we arrived, the door was slightly ajar. My stomach dropped as I pushed it open, calling out her name. The apartment was eerily silent, but nothing seemed out of place. At least, not at first. But then Emma noticed something on the wall, barely visible in the dim light. Scrawled across the wall in what looked like red spray paint were the words, "She's with us now." My blood ran cold. There was no sign of struggle, no forced entry. It was as if Lily had simply vanished, leaving behind nothing but a chilling message. We called the police and they arrived within minutes. They searched the apartment, took our statements, and assured us they would do everything they could to find Lily. But I could see the doubt in their eyes. They had no leads, no clues. It was as if she had disappeared into thin air. Days turned into a week, and still, there was no word from Lily. The police were baffled, and the case grew colder with each passing day. But Emma and I knew that whatever had happened to Lily was connected to that night, to the van, and to the masked figures that had chased us. Then, just as we were about to lose hope, Emma received a letter. It was postmarked from a small town in the middle of nowhere, with no return address. The handwriting was messy, almost frantic, and the message inside was chilling. "They're watching. Don't trust anyone." There was no signature, but we knew it was from Lily. We packed our bags that night, taking only what we could carry, and left the city without looking back. We didn't know where we were going, only that we had to keep moving, to stay one step ahead of whatever was chasing us. But deep down, I knew that running wouldn't save us, that the van, the masked figures, the ominous message, they were always one step ahead, waiting for the right moment to strike. We drove for hours, sticking to back roads and avoiding towns, until we finally reached a small, secluded cabin deep in the woods. It belonged to Emma's family, a place they rarely visited. It was remote, isolated, the kind of place where you could disappear if you needed to. The first few days at the cabin were quiet, almost peaceful. We spent our time trying to piece together what had happened, but we always came back to the same questions with no answers. Why were we targeted? What did they want with Lily? And who were they? But then, just as we were starting to feel safe, strange things began to happen. At first it was small, noises in the night, a feeling of being watched. But then, one evening we heard footsteps outside. Emma grabbed a flashlight, and we cautiously stepped out onto the porch. The night was dark, the trees casting long, eerie shadows. We stood there, listening, the flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. And then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it. A figure, barely visible, standing at the edge of the tree line. It was tall, dressed in dark clothing, its face obscured. "Who's there?" Emma called out, her voice shaking slightly. The figure didn't respond. It just stood there, watching us. I felt a cold dread creep up my spine. This was no ordinary person. "Get inside," I whispered, pulling Emma back towards the door. We bolted the door behind us, our hearts racing. We checked the locks on the windows, barricaded the door, but no matter what we did, the feeling of unease wouldn't go away. The next morning, we found something chilling outside the cabin, footprints leading up to the porch and then back into the woods. But there were no other signs of intrusion. Whoever, or whatever it was, they had been close. Too close. Emma and I knew we couldn't stay there any longer. Whatever was happening, it was escalating, and we were running out of time. We packed our things quickly, deciding to head to the nearest town and find help. As we drove down the winding road through the woods, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being followed. Every rustle in the trees, every shadow felt like a threat. When we finally reached the small town, we went straight to the police. We told them everything about the van, the masked figures, Lily's disappearance, and the figure outside the cabin. The officer we spoke to listened patiently, but I could tell he was skeptical. "We'll look into it," he said, but his tone was dismissive. "You should consider staying somewhere more secure." Frustrated and scared, we left the station and checked into a motel on the outskirts of town. The room was small and musty, but it felt safer than the cabin. We locked the door, double-checked the windows, and tried to get some rest. That night, I was woken by a noise outside our door, a soft scraping sound like something being dragged along the ground. My heart pounded in my chest as I crept out of bed and approached the door, listening. There was a knock, a slow, deliberate knock that sent chills down my spine. "Who is it?" I whispered, barely able to get the words out. There was no answer, just the sound of something sliding against the door. I motioned for Emma to wake up, and we both stood there, staring at the door, paralyzed with fear. After what felt like an eternity, the sound stopped. We waited, holding our breath, but there was nothing but silence. The next morning, we found a note slipped under the door. It was written in the same frantic handwriting as the letter Emma had received. "You can't hide. We know where you are." We couldn't stay in the motel. We couldn't go back to the cabin. We were running out of options. Desperate, we decided to leave town entirely, to head somewhere far away, somewhere we could disappear. But as we packed up the car and prepared to leave, something terrifying happened. As we drove out of the motel parking lot, I noticed a familiar vehicle parked a few spaces down, a white van, identical to the one that had chased us that night. My blood ran cold as I realized the truth. We hadn't escaped. They had been following us all along. "Emma, we have to go now!" I shouted, my voice trembling with fear. Emma floored the gas and we sped out of the lot, the van pulling out behind us. It was happening again. The chase, the fear, the sense of impending doom. We drove for hours, the van never far behind, until we reached a stretch of desolate highway surrounded by nothing but open fields. There was nowhere to hide, nowhere to run, but then, just as all hope seemed lost, we saw a patrol car parked on the side of the road. Emma swerved towards it, honking the horn and flashing the lights. The officer inside stepped out, looking alarmed. "The van!" I shouted as we pulled up beside him. "It's following us!" The officer immediately got into his car and turned on his lights, pulling out onto the road to intercept the van. But as we watched, something strange happened. The van suddenly slowed down, then turned off the road, disappearing into the fields. We were safe, at least for the moment. The officer told us to follow him back to the station, where we could make a formal report. But as we drove, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. At the station, we explained everything again, but this time the officers took us more seriously. They promised to investigate, to keep an eye out for the van, and to protect us. But deep down, I knew that protection wouldn't be enough. Whatever this was, whoever they weren't going to stop. Emma and I decided to disappear for good. We cut all ties, changed our names, and moved to a remote part of the country, far from where anyone would think to look. It was a lonely, isolating existence, but it was the only way to stay safe. Years passed, and the fear slowly faded, though it never truly went away. We never spoke about what happened, never allowed ourselves to think about Lily or the van. It was too dangerous. But sometimes late at night, when the wind howls outside and the shadows grow long, I still hear that soft knock on the door, that slow, deliberate scraping sound. And I know, deep down, that they're still out there watching, waiting, and that one day they'll come for us again. You work very hard for new videos every day. Subscribe to support us.